Wetsuits, specifically those for triathlon swimming, have come a long way in the last 45 years or so. Today, it's a thriving industry that is continually pushing technological and performance advancements. Orca is one of the major players in this market and has been making innovative wetsuits for 30 years now. So to celebrate this milestone, we're going to be joining Orca to take a look back at their history, but also the history of the triathlon wetsuit itself. It is 2025, in case you hadn't been paying attention, and this is Orca's most advanced wetsuit to date, their new and limited edition Apex 30 to celebrate their anniversary. It's got friction-reducing surface treatment, strategically positioned panels, exo-lift buoyancy, core stabilization, Yamamoto neoprene that just seems too thin to be real. It's crazy. This is cutting-edge wetsuit technology of today, but before we marvel over and take a closer look at this wetsuit, let's take a look back at where triathlon wetsuits all began. Well, with no definitive history of triathlon, the truth is some blend of all the personal versions out there. We actually found a great piece on the great website called tryhistory.com, which we'll link below this video, written by Scott Tinley, one of triathlon's OGs. Now, some of his version may be in dispute, but it's still a great read. Now, wetsuits made of neoprene, as we know them today, were invented in 1952. But 30 years later, in 1982, as triathlon was starting to get a foothold and more races were emerging, there was actually no such thing as a triathlon wetsuit. Open water swimming, as it still does today, forbade any type of covering. Your English Channel swim doesn't count if not done in Speedo. But the cold water was becoming a barrier to entry in triathlons, and no such rule existed in triathlon. Competitors therefore used modified surf wetsuits to simply survive these frigid temperatures. Now, various iterations of neoprene vests and long john designs were invented. O'Neill, obviously a surf wetsuit brand, even gave them away in athlete goodie bags at the first Ironman on continental USA in Los Angeles in 1983. But actually, half the competitors chose not to wear the restrictive neoprene vest, even though it was warmer and free. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, as Tinley tells it, the Aussies had discovered something no one had even contemplated: a tight-fitting, thick wetsuit. Not only keeps you warmer, but aids buoyancy and makes you faster. There were no water temperature rules back then, so they just wore them everywhere. And over time, the secret trickled out. Well-made swimming wetsuits were warmer and faster, but they were still pretty much only available as bespoke custom-made items. Of course, it didn't take long for clever entrepreneurs to see the market and capitalize on it. So pioneering work from Dan Empfield saw the launch of Quintanar in 1987, and the rest is, as they say, history. Orca was launched just 8 years later in 1995 by New Zealand triathlon champion Scott Unsworth, who was passionate about creating better, faster wetsuits than those on the market.
So yeah, back in the days, I was New Zealand triathlon champion, junior triathlon champion, and I did the Commonwealth Games in triathlon. I got sponsored, as my first sponsor was by Quintanar Wetsuits. And I never actually got to meet Dan Empfield directly, but it was just an honor to be sponsored by a big wetsuit brand back in those days. And then when I got a back injury, because I think I probably pushed myself too hard, too young, too many miles. And so I looked for something to do differently, and I became a swimming coach because that's what I was strong in. And I just thought, if I'm going to be a swimming coach, I really should be selling a wetsuit. And then I went to this wetsuit company in New Zealand, and they sponsored me as well after using Quintanar. And I went to them as a swimming coach and said, look, can I start my own brand? Because I think I know a lot about wetsuits now. And that kind of how it all started. And I remember in the early days, I was always dreaming, how can I make it faster? How can I make the wetsuit faster? What can I do to just have that edge over the competition and give that performance? And one of the things that I learned in the early days in triathlon, a lot of people were not wearing long sleeve wetsuits. And so I was, back in the days when I was competing with Rick Wells, who was the strongest swimmer in the sport then, I was wearing a long sleeve wetsuit and I was sitting on his feet and he was like, who's this guy sitting on my feet? So implementing long sleeve wetsuits was one of my things. And I adopted that with a lot of athletes. And then I brought that into the wetsuit. And then I wanted to really make sure that Orca always had the most flexible wetsuit. And so we developed the patterns and the panels that could work with the body. Rather than just putting a stretch panel in a certain area, we actually looked at the muscle groups, looked at how the body works when you swim, and designed panels that actually worked as you swam rather than just a panel for the sake of a panel. And then the things, little details like, we had things on the forearm which would create a bit of friction when you're pulling down, which is obviously illegal now. And just the tightness as well. The tighter you make it for the pro athletes, the more streamlined it is. So there was things like that I knew as a swimmer that just really helped me design the design of the pattern of the suit with a difference. And that makes a big difference, the way it's actually internally made. And the neck, obviously, we did so many different variations of neck designs. And I think a lot of my competition followed Orca for many years and still do today. And I think it's an honor in a way that they want to follow us.
But it's more than just producing a good wetsuit. We all have different swimming styles. A wetsuit that works for you may not work for me. And so brands began to explore different materials with different characteristics to help those swimmers. And this is where Yamamoto entered the scene. Yamamoto is a limestone sourced rubber. It's produced in Japan and it has differing levels of buoyancy and stretch properties. The Yamamoto 38, 39 and 40 are probably the most widely used. You probably even noticed these numbers and references on your wetsuit before. And as I say, they all have differing properties. For example, 39 is more flexible than 38 and 40 more so than both. Yamamoto is pretty much used in every triathlon wetsuit, even today. But the big question is, how do you strategically place these different materials and create the best fit for a swimmer?
First of all, the most important thing is to have under control all the properties of the different materials. In that way, we are always looking for new innovations, new materials, new fabrics, everything, asking for samples and testing them in our lab, testing stretchability, cycles about the durability, to test the durability, abrasion test, salinity test, buoyancy, and many other issues. With that information, we create a big database. And the next step, the second step, is to create the first specification sheets. We create these specification sheets, first of all, with our knowledge, using that initial database, and we ask for the first prototypes. The Orca product and development team is testing these first prototypes. Usually we need 1, 2, or even 3 different prototypes until we feel quite comfortable. The next step, the third step, would be to create some more samples once we are confident with the initial ones to test with the athletes, with the BMC team and with some other Orca athletes. We go to some swimming pools or even to the open water. We make some testing, we get some data, and usually there we need like 1 or 2 samples to arrive to a point where we are quite confident. And the last step is just to create some more samples, to spread those samples and share it with many other athletes to get the final check.
Well, it's really cool to hear how these suits come to life and just how much testing and development really takes place. And actually, we got to witness this with some of their pro athletes. Now, during my time in the sport, I've only actually ever known there to be multiple suits from each brand, each optimized for differing swimming styles and positions in the water. It's almost hard to imagine and believe that you could only have one option. But obviously, this was the case in the early days. Orca were, of course, at the forefront of this development. They started with that iconic Predator suit, which many of you remember. But this was quickly followed by suits like their popular 3.8, which was designed to help lift the hips and legs, and the Alpha. And many other brands also followed suit with similar offerings. And in the history of wetsuits, 2012 was a big year. SCS surface treatment revolutionized the market. This treatment has a microcell structure that repels water, reducing friction and increasing speed through the water. Again, something that's just commonplace these days. Then we had a raft of other developments like Aerodome and Exolift panels with hundreds of air pockets between neoprene layers, providing tons of added buoyancy. So hearing all of this, it's really quite amazing taking a step back and reflecting on where this all started and where we are today. And the total wetsuit market globally in 2024 was actually estimated at around $1.6 billion, with triathlon wetsuits making up around 20% of that, so more than $300 million.
Hey, and 30 years of innovation technology has brought us this, the new Orca Apex 30.
Yeah, now you don't even need to be wearing this to see that there's something quite special about this wetsuit. I mean, even on camera, you should be able to see that it's got this incredibly thin neoprene through the arms here. Now, this is the advanced 0.88 free technology, which typically we only see in the forearm area on wetsuits. Although some people may remember the Orca Alpha actually went all the way up into the shoulder area. Well, they've taken it one step further with this. They've also gone down the side in the upper torso area and combined it with their new dynamic fit technology, which is basically a new layup of the neoprene through the shoulder area to make it as free as possible. And it's just super thin.
Yeah, of course, they've also combined it with their Apex range's nano ice technology coating, which obviously makes it very slick and smooth through the water. And of course, it's got the Orca ExoLift technology in both the legs, the torso, the lower back, and your chest, combined with Orca's CLS Plus technology, which we mentioned earlier, to support the swimmer.
And because we're triathletes, it has that Hydrolite technology, which has hydrophobic properties. This is in the lower leg region to allow you to whip the wetsuit off super quick through transition. There's a lot of tech.
There is. And because it's a limited edition, only 200 of them are made to celebrate Orca's heritage.
Well, 198 probably. Well, no, 197, because Hayden Wild's going to be wearing one as well.
Only 197 left for you guys to get. Celebrating Orca's heritage, and because it's celebrating Orca's heritage, they've included some throwbacks from their previous wetsuits, such as the little drips on the coating from the 3.8, also the text is from the 3.8, and then this is the same design that's in the Flex and the Flow of their previous ranges.
Who would have thought a wetsuit could pack so much technology? I guess the big question now, what next?
What a question. It's a really nice question that we've been thinking about it for a long time. In the short term, we are currently working with Yamamoto. It is our partner for material. It is currently the perfect balance for us. Perfect performance and great sustainability. But in the long term, we are working with R&D departments in order to find the next big material, completely different to neoprene and more sustainable, especially because we are looking for a recyclable material. Right now, the neoprene is not recyclable. And even though we are working with companies like Circular Flow, and to give a second life to the neoprenes, it is not recyclable. So we need to look for something sustainable, and at the same time, and this is the hardest part, to be as performance as the current neoprene in terms of flexibility and the heat transferring. So it's a great question. I'll keep it secret. We are working on it. It is not going to be easy, of course. This is the next big thing happening. And in the meantime, as we say in our last campaign, we're working to have a 1% better wetsuit every time.
Well, not to overstate it, but there is no doubt that without triathlon wetsuits, triathlon would not be the global sport it is today. There simply aren't enough places in the world where the water is warm enough to have a triathlon swim leg without a wetsuit to keep them warm. At least not a swim that people enjoy and might participate in more than once. And if that means a faster swim split too, well, that's a bonus. Well, a huge thank you to Orca for inviting us to take a look at their new suit, and congratulations to them on 30 incredible years in the sport. We hope you've enjoyed finding out a little history about the brand that has brought us so much, and also the beginnings of wetsuits in triathlon. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up